Hello, Tech fans, and welcome in to episode 117 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, originating from TSL's high-tech studios in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Whether you're watching live on Facebook, whether you're watching archived on YouTube or on Apple Podcast or SoundCloud, however you consume the Tech Sideline Podcast, we're so glad you could join us today on Wednesday morning, February the 12th, for a special edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast, because we're pleased to be joined by the Athletics' Andy Bitter, who's here with us this morning. Andy, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be
this nice, cozy set that you have here. I like it.
The only thing we lack is like a fire.
Yeah.
Andy did walk in and go, wow.
Well, I don't want to break the fourth wall here, but this is like in an office building, and then it feels like it's this like cozy little cabin of Hokies gear here. So,
yeah, we do need a bearskin rug and a fire.
Yeah. When you see it on the camera, it's like, oh, are they in a small cottage outside of that? It's like, no, it's actually like an office building here. But just imagine that we're in a cottage. It looks much nicer.
Right.
We're thrilled to have Andy here, as we're going to be talking a lot about Virginia Tech football. And we remind you, if you have a question for Andy, we'll get to them at the end of the show. We've got Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes, the best producer in the land, taking your questions on Facebook Live. Again, here on the podcast set, we've got Andy Bitter. We've got Tech Sideline Managing Editor Chris Coleman, our founder and general manager Will Stewart, and I am your podcast host, Evan Hughes. Again, so glad you're with us. Episode 117 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. A reminder that this week and every week, the Fisher Law Firm is Virginia's trusted DUI and traffic defense firm dedicated to defending individuals charged with traffic-related offenses. From their office in Blacksburg, they are able to serve the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. Whether you are charged with driving under the influence or speeding, the Fisher Law Firm realizes that each case is important to the client. To date, the firm has defended more than 30,000 people charged with moving violations. For a free consultation, call anytime, day or evening, toll-free at 1-800-680-7031. Again, that's 1-800-680-7031, or you can email them at info@fisherlegal.com. The Fisher Law Firm, proud sponsors of the Tech Sideline Podcast. All right, with that, again, we welcome in our crew. We welcome all of you watching live on Facebook. And how we just started off the podcast, the last 5 minutes, we have been talking about not Virginia Tech football, Office Space.
Office Space, the movie.
Evan thought it was a TV show until we just told him it was a movie.
And Andy told me he lost a little bit of respect for me. So
A little
now I
bit.
really need to see this movie.
You were making it out like, oh man, it's this huge undertaking that I need to watch this. I'm going to
It's
clear
really
some
not.
time on my schedule once I'm done watching these other shows. It's like it's an hour and a half movie.
That's what I was concerned about, was a TV show. Like, I was telling you last week, I'm so into the West Wing right now, I didn't want to stop. But if it's a movie, I can certainly carve out
knock it
2
out in one
hours.
night.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and you got to see the uncut version, too. They run it a lot on Comedy Central, but it's cut on Comedy Central. So I don't know what the best way to see the uncut version is.
It might be on Netflix or Amazon or something like
Something
that.
like that, yeah.
Okay, so we need to see The Office Space.
He'll
I need to
find
see
it.
The Office Space. We'll talk about it on
So
Monday.
when are you going to see it? Let's be
This
specific.
weekend. I will, by the next show on Monday morning, Tech Sideline Podcast, I will have
Also,
seen The
I
Office
think it's
Space.
just called Office Space. It's like Facebook. It's not the
Okay,
Facebook, the Office Space.
Office
Right.
Space.
Office
Okay.
Space. He's going to watch it on the bus ride to South Carolina.
Yes.
All right. And
I
why-
will.
That'd be a
why-
good use of time.
It
That
would
would
be.
be. Yeah.
And why are you going to South Carolina?
Going with Tech Baseball this weekend.
Okay.
Their opening weekend at the down in Conway, South Carolina, hosted by Coastal Carolina. They've actually got some good competition this weekend.
Yeah,
Okay,
It's one of those
it
team
looks like
buses. Do they have like a TV in the team bus or something?
I don't know.
Like that?
I mean,
everybody could watch
Everybody
on
can
it.
watch
Everybody,
together.
what a great motivational
starting
movie
to
to
think,
watch
like-
to open the season.
I'm starting to think like this is lost on this generation, and it kind of.
I was going to
It
say,
kind of upsets me.
It
That,
does.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I just had never even heard of it. No disrespect to the movie.
take a poll. I want to know how many of those baseball players have seen the movie.
it offends us so much because it makes us feel old.
Well, I was going through the comments last week when this came up on the show, and there was a comment that said "Fire Evan" with an exclamation point. I texted Malcolm like, "Did I say something last week?" He's like, "No, someone was saying Fire Evan after you haven't seen Office Space." So, anyways,
So fix that.
Yes, we will fix that. Again, we're so glad to have Andy Bitter of The Athletic joining us here on the Tech Sideline Podcast. Andy, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule, and looking forward to talking about Virginia Tech football. There's never a downtime to not talk about Virginia Tech football. There's always something going on.
And it'd be nice if there was a little bit of downtime instead of the freakouts that seem to happen on a regular basis with this fan base. But, that's good. People are passionate about it.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they could not be passionate on like a vacation week or something like that, so they could step away from it a little bit. But, people are into it.
Yeah, and people have been certainly into it the last couple of weeks or so. There's been a lot of news going around this Virginia Tech football program over the last month or so, and that's kind of where I want to start, Andy, and then we'll get Will and Chris involved here. We've been talking a lot on the podcast the last couple of weeks, of course, about, Will, what was the word you described the Justin Fuente Baylor
dalliance.
Dalliance. I like that word a lot. The dalliance between Justin Fuente and Baylor, almost a month now removed from that situation. And then the press conference last week and the transfer portal and that news. Looking at those two pieces of information, having some time to reflect on it, what did you make of all of that?
I think it's sort of part of college football these days. I mean, Justin Fuente is probably glad today that he's no longer the poster child of, sort of tone deaf or awkward comments about the transfer portal, because Mel Tucker just took the Michigan State job after 1 year at Colorado. And I think he had a comment that was something like, there's no transfer portal in real life. So for somebody to say that forcefully and then take a job somewhere else after 1 year, maybe Fuente is a little bit off the hook. I didn't think what he said was all that bad, to be honest. But if columnists want to blow it out of proportion this time, they've got somebody else that they can kind of focus their Death Star on at that point. But a month removed. I mean, it kind of happens in college football. I mean, guys are going to talk to other schools about jobs. Fuente said that the only schools he's talked to about jobs, like actually spoken to, are Virginia Tech when he took this one, and Baylor when he ended up staying put in this one. I think a lot of people are like, oh, it wasn't his job to turn down or something like that. I don't know if that's really the case. I think there was a lot of interest from Baylor's side. They did not send a small contingent of people up here to talk to him, and they met for a decent amount of time. People are like, oh, was there an offer? College jobs, you don't get an offer until you're gonna say yes. It's kind of like a marriage proposal. You don't ask until you know what the answer is gonna be. So these people, oh, he didn't have an offer to turn down. It's like, that's not really how it works in college football. But I would say that the interest was very serious from Baylor about this, and Fuente liked what he had here, decided to stay put. Maybe pushes for a little bit more resources in certain departments, in certain terms of recruiting, staffing, and things like that. I mean, there's no change to his contract or anything like that, or his compensation, but I think he would like to have a little bit more help in terms of the people working with him in the recruiting department and things like that. So, I think it could be a net positive for Virginia Tech in the end if they do get more of those resources, and that's sort of more clearly communicated to athletic administration and to the academic side, that they do a lot of the approving of these kind of jobs and stuff like that. But for the moment, I could see why Hokies fans would be freaking out about it, because this is, as the Michigan State search just showed, this is not the time of year where you want to be going through a coaching search. Like, it's really late in the process, and a lot of guys just aren't going to leave because it's just an awkward time to leave right now. So I think Virginia Tech fans can probably be happy that they're not going through that right now.
Chris, a month removed, we've talked about it, but I mean, even more time to marinate it. I mean, how will you remember this 5 years from now?
I remember everybody being mad at him when they ought to be probably thanking him, because I think he's lit a fire to a certain extent, as far as I think he's increased the awareness of some of the issues they have over there relative to other schools as far as resources, staffing, and things like that. I think he was interested in the Baylor job. I think it was a win-win situation for him. Either he gets the job offer at Baylor and makes more money and he's closer to home, or he opens the door to getting more resources at Virginia Tech. So it was absolutely a win-win situation for him there. In effect, I think he basically, whether he intended to do this or not, I don't know, but he basically beamered Virginia Tech. That was a term when Frank Beamer would go talk to other schools back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and come back and get a raise for him and his coaching staff. Well, Fuente is not getting a raise for him and his coaching staff. I think he's going to have access to more resources to help make Virginia Tech more competitive. So that's my takeaway from it, is long-term, or short-term, a lot of people are angry with him. Long-term, I think what he did was for the best.
I think it increased awareness of some of the lack of resources, as we've talked about. And what do we mean by that? We specifically, in my opinion, I think the thing that's most important is space for a larger staff, specifically a larger recruiting staff. Nick Saban's the one who put in the model of the large staff. I think when he took the Alabama job in 2008,
That's right.
Yeah. He brought the NFL model. I think he was coming from the Dolphins, and that included a huge support staff. So I think programs up until then had been locked into, you can have the head coach, you can have 9 assistant coaches, it's 10 now, and 2 graduate assistants. And I think they that's what they went with. And Saban said, yeah, I want all that, but I also want a staff of 10 or 15 people who can help me break down film, scout upcoming opponents, identify recruiting prospects, manage the recruiting process. Saban really started that. And Dabo took full advantage of it. But by then, this was a concept that was 3 or 4 years old. And when you look across college football and people expand their stadiums or build new stadiums or whatever, everybody sees that. Nobody sees the guys who are doing the work down in the offices in the football offices. That kind of stuff isn't well known to the common fan. And so you may not realize that Virginia Tech has fewer guys than other programs. And John Yetzi talked about this on a podcast the other day. He's director of recruiting for Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
He talked about going to some sort of seminar or gathering convention for these kind of staffers. And Virginia Tech took 2 people, and UVA had 8, and other programs had 12 to 15 guys there. And that's when Yetzi's eyes kind of popped, and he said, wow, we're really far behind. Your typical fan doesn't see that stuff. So those are the kind of resources we're talking about. And I say this all the time. Virginia Tech doesn't need a football building with a lazy river and mini golf and stuff like that. They need these guys. They need a larger staff, and they need a place to put them. That's what we're talking about when we talk about resources. These coaches now are making $4 million, $5 million, $6 million a year. Frank was, in air quotes, only making like $125,000 or $150,000 a year back then. It's not about money anymore for these guys. It's about being given the tools to have a chance to win.
Yeah. To me, I think Fuente had a quote during signing day, not this year, but last year. And I saved the quote in case we ever needed it. It was, how did it go? We don't have the staff or the facilities to accommodate a large number of recruits or a big recruiting weekend.
I think he was talking about like junior days and
and stuff like that. Like they can only accommodate a certain amount of recruits and their families because Virginia Tech doesn't have a big enough staff to efficiently handle all those players, process those players when they're on campus. And during the week, they don't have enough office space to actually put that extra staff, even if they wanted to hire them. I've walked through the Merriman Center and Jamerson Center from top to bottom throughout my course of covering the team, and it seems pretty filled up to me.
And I'm sure Andy's done the same. You've walked around in Merriman and seen guys crammed into offices.
Yeah, the recruiting department, there's like 3 guys within the same room. I think their GAs share a lot of stuff. I think less a concern about like actual like bricks and mortar and like where you put them is just having the positions full time.
Yep.
I listened to that Yezi podcast too, and he mentioned that in Fuente's first contract, where it said they were creating a recruiting position explicitly in the contract, that was Yezi's position. And they have not really added anything full time since then. I think they're up to 4 or 5 in the recruiting department, and you can look at other programs. I want to say he said Virginia has like 17 or something like that. And that includes like regional scouts. Like I did a story on Jordan Mack before the ACC championship game, and he was talking about his brother is up there, and his brother played at Richmond, and then he was a regional scout for UVA. I'm kind of like, what is that?
What does that mean?
Yeah. And it's basically he's out there trying to find other guys. This is how they described it, trying to find other guys who are like Jordan Mack that fit that program and have that kind of profile. And it's just more eyes to look at, film. And, you obviously can't go out and like talk to these guys if you're not an assistant coach. But it's more people to break down, huddle film and go through stuff and kind of do the legwork, the nitty-gritty stuff on recruiting that before you even get out on the trail and you talk to these guys and try to convince them to come here. You have to identify them first. That's probably where these programs like Virginia Tech need to succeed is, are you going to beat guys out for the 4 top high 4 stars and 5-star recruits? That's never been Tech's MO, but they need to evaluate better and find guys that are, maybe not the highest ranked recruits, but become, very valuable players over time. Because I think when you look at successful recruiting classes, and I do this every year, I go back and look at it, and it's, they're all ranked about the same, with the exception of this past year. They're all ranked 20th to 30th, somewhere like that. But there's a lot of variation within that, and a lot of it is based on how these guys pan out. It's not necessarily always the stars. Tech, I think, has done better with the stars lately than they have, 2011 to 2015. Like, they just seem to have a lot of guys that busted in that time frame. But lately, I feel like, Dax Hollifield, Trey Turner, these guys that were really highly ranked have actually panned out in recent years. But, if you sign a 4-star guy, and after a year he's gone, it's like, well, what have you done for the program? Like, yeah, you did something pretty good on signing day, but it's not going to do anything for the program. Whereas you sign somebody like, I love going to Greg Stroman as an example, who's a 2-star guy, I think, on Rivals. He was way down there, but he was a productive player throughout his entire career and then turned into a fabulous player by the time he was a senior. But even examples beyond that, guys that maybe aren't stars but at least contribute to the program. You just have to reduce the number of guys that are just out and out misses.
Yeah, Fuentes talked before about having, recruiting 4-stars and winning the signing day press conference, and then those guys aren't even in your program 2 years later. And like you said, you haven't done the program any good when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, you have to recruit to your culture, I think, and signing a guy like Jacoby Pinckney helps your recruiting rankings, and everybody's like, woohoo, Virginia Tech beat out Alabama and Georgia for a wide receiver. That's great. That's going to elevate the program. Well, apparently he just did not have the work ethic required, and was out of the program after 1 semester. So yes, Tech's recruiting class ranking was helped, but it didn't help the program at all, did it?
Sure. Well, I'm not one of those guys. It's like, recruiting rankings don't matter. They matter in terms of competing for a national title.
I always use the phrase in aggregate. When you talk about large numbers,
right.
you
macro sense they matter. Micro sense, you're going to have a lot of variation there. I feel like there's maybe sort of this unrealistic expectation from a lot of Hokies fans, like, they got to get back, they got to recruit top 10 classes, and it's just like, it's just not going to happen.
They never did.
I have
Arguably.
this theory, and it's not my theory. I mean, other people have theorized this too, that like, you kind of are what you are in recruiting. Like, you're not going to dramatically change the course of where you typically recruit. Now, Clemson has. Clemson's a little bit of an exception, I think. They had the potential for top 10 classes before, and they had done it every now and then, and now they're kind of on a different plane.
But I know you've looked at their recruiting rankings after Dabo came on board, and it was actually years before he reached this level.
Right. I mean, they had to start winning before that came
his
around.
His classes were ranked 13th to 15th. They were good.
But Clemson had done that before.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech's never really done that with any regularity. I think the highest they were was 14th by Rivals in 2005.
Yeah.
And everything else is 20 to 30. I mean, that's just sort of the ballpark they live in. So if you can be there but then find success within that, I think that's where the Hokies have to do their thing.
One thing I always find interesting, this stat got brought up somewhere recently, and I just looked it up on SBNation.com, was you look at, Tech, not there yet, but you look at teams that have made the college football playoff since 2014 and where their recruiting class average was for that year. I think the only team that I read that was outside the top 15 or 20 was Michigan State in 2015, and they had like the 29th best recruiting class. And you look at like Alabama, and 14 was 1, Florida State was 5, Ohio State was 6, Clemson was 13 at the time. But it just goes to show, like you were saying, Andy, that recruiting does matter in the numbers.
And Michigan State, for what it's worth, got blown off the field.
Yeah, crushed.
Alabama.
Yeah, I think it was 38-0.
That was a men versus boys game.
Yes.
And, I went to Wisconsin. I follow Wisconsin football. I covered it way back in the day when I was a student. I see a lot of similarities between Wisconsin and Virginia Tech. Wisconsin recruits to what it is, and it's never going to have high recruiting rankings. It'll do pretty well for itself if they recruit to the system. They can achieve great things, be a top 10 team, but then when you start talking about, can they win a national championship? I'm just being honest with myself. No, I don't think Wisconsin can. Just in the same way with Virginia Tech, probably have to default to say no. It's a really tough thing to do to get in that upper tier of college football. So I think Wisconsin's lost like 7 or 8 straight to Ohio State or something like that. And yeah, I don't like it, but it's just sort of the reality of the pecking order of things. So I think if Virginia Tech ever wants to get into this national championship conversation again, it sort of has to hack the system. It needs to find a way to succeed that's not just strictly based on pure talent that comes in. You have to have a system that can succeed beyond what the capabilities are, recruiting rankings wise. A lot of these guys, you saw the recipe for it in 1999.
Right.
I mean, you have a real solid defense across the board. That all of a sudden Corey Moore is a standout, one of the best in the country, and then obviously you have a transcendent player in Michael Vick. But it just shows how many things have to go right for a program to even be in the national championship conversation. If you're not one of those programs that recruit like that, you need to have, the best, if not, one of the best, if not the best player in program history. All due respect to Bruce Smith, I'm talking about impact on the program, and a guy that changed college football, and kind of an easy conference and schedule to go through, and they see you get to the championship game and you still can't win it. You come that close. It just shows how tough it is to do.
And recruiting has changed so much. Michael Vick picked Virginia Tech over East Carolina and Syracuse.
Right.
These days, Tech would have to beat out Penn State and Clemson and Florida and Auburn and everybody on the East Coast, at least for Michael Vick. It's just changed so much over the last 20 years. So it's kind of like, recruiting in the 90s and 2000s, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison to what recruiting is like today. It's just a completely different.
Camps were a thing back then, right?
Right. No, absolutely not.
Huddle obviously wasn't.
People didn't recruit out of their state nearly as much as they do these days. So there were recruits that didn't even bother, or there were teams that didn't even bother to recruit the state of Virginia back then that are now paying a lot of attention to the state of Virginia because the internet's made the world a little bit smaller when it comes to things like that. And I was actually going to grill you on Wisconsin today. I've accumulated some data. I've yet to run an article, but I've always said not always, but the last couple of years I've said Virginia Tech needs to model their program after Wisconsin. When I was growing up, Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, and Nebraska all reminded me of each other. They were all strong running teams, tough, physical, blue-collar guys. And if you look at the last 10 years, and I've done average class rankings and everything like that, Nebraska has recruited the best in terms of, air quotes, recruited the best in the recruiting rankings over the last 10 years out of those 3 teams. And out of those 3 teams, they have the worst record over those 10 years. Wisconsin has recruited the worst, air quotes, over those 10 years, but they have the best record. And Wisconsin typically recruits probably in the 35 to 40 range, 35 to 45 range in the recruiting rankings. So to me, and I've been saying this, it doesn't matter to me whether Virginia Tech signs the 20th or 25th ranked class or the 40th ranked class, because you're talking at that point, guys behind a computer assigning, fractions of a percent of yeah, exactly, mm-hmm. And that determines whether you're 26th or 41st, a couple of fractions. So to me, at that point, it's more about evaluation, recruiting to your culture and player development. What Wisconsin has done has been amazing, and the thing is they've done it with multiple coaches.
Well, they've done it with multiple coaches, but it's been one guy that's been the guiding principle to it. It's 30 years of Barry Alvarez.
Their general manager, so to speak, basically.
Yeah, everybody that comes in is going to coach to that system because that is what Barry Alvarez has vetted in these coaches, and he knows that they're going to do. I mean, Paul Christ played at Wisconsin under Barry Alvarez. I think he was a quarterback way back in the day. He's from Madison. They got their guy. He's going to be there.
Yeah,
I can't imagine him leaving for any other college job.
So, do they have these conversations? The Wisconsin fan base, do they? And fan bases do this. They bristle at where they are. They want to be better. Every fan base wants to be better. Do they talk about, we need to get away from this and do it? Do those conversations occur amongst the Wisconsin fan base?
And in my I don't want to say hot-headed youth, but my when I was a college student, I covered the team as a senior. The fall of my senior year, the 2 previous years, Wisconsin had gone to the Rose Bowl in both of those years and won it both times. My senior year, they went 8-5 and went to the Sun Bowl. That was my first experience of El Paso going to the Sun Bowl back then. During that season, Brooks Bollinger was the quarterback.
I remember him.
For Wisconsin those couple years, and he wasn't much of a thrower. He was, game manager type, could run the ball very well. They had the backup, Jim Sorgi, who could throw the ball better. He was actually a backup for Peyton Manning for like 10 years, like the greatest job in sports.
The Don Strock job.
Hold a clipboard for 10 years to get paid for all that. But he was a much better passer, not as much of a runner. And, as a 20-year-old senior writing about the team, you get seduced by oh my gosh, this guy can open up the passing game so much. Why isn't he starting and all this stuff? And I look back at some of the quotes now from the coaches that talk about Bollinger, and they're like, he was the best leader we've ever had for this program. And stuff like that. Just stuff that you don't see when you don't have that much experience covering college football. You're like, this guy throws it much better. He should be the starter, and that's the end of that. So, I think I have matured over time and have a little bit different perspective on some of this stuff and understand why coaches go with certain players in situations like that. But yeah, I mean, that was just an example that I was like that back in the day. I'm sure, I know a lot of people were as well. I'm sure they're still like that. Like, oh, why can't Wisconsin get over the hump against Ohio State? It's like, well, because Ohio State's one of the premier programs in the history of the sport. It's tough to do. Yeah. And it's tough to do with any sort of regularity. I'm pleased with Wisconsin's approach. They get a bunch of corn-fed linemen. They get like a stud running back from New Jersey, it seems like. Yeah,
like who won the Heisman the year Michael Vick was third?
Exactly.
Ron Dane.
Deserving, by the way. I know I'll take some heat from Hokies fans when I say that. But
that was a career award.
It was not just a career. He ran for like 2,000 yards that year. Okay. And he did it where he sat out a lot of fourth quarters. I'm just saying he had a very good year.
He was a monster.
Also, if you look back at Vick's season, stat-wise, not crazy. And obviously, you vote before the Florida State game.
Yeah.
If you do it after the Florida State game, I think that changes a lot of people's opinions.
Well, Vic's stats were incredible that year as far as passing efficiency. He would just throw the ball 12 times a game.
Exactly.
So he wasn't 60 yards to Andre Davis, and boom.
He wasn't racking up huge stats.
Right. No. Yeah, I'm guessing he sat out a bunch of fourth quarters.
A lot of fourth quarters, and he missed one full game due to injury. Really, the first half of the season, he was limited with an ankle injury.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to do while we're talking about Wisconsin and how it kind of has similarities to Virginia Tech, keep that discussion going, because the defensive coordinator who we've talked about for Wisconsin is Jim Leonard, who is of course, he was a terrific safety. He played 10 seasons in the NFL. Younger defensive coordinator, Power 5 job. And Chris made the comparison early about Jim Leonard and Justin Hamilton as the new defense coordinator for Virginia Tech.
Stolen shamelessly from a tweet by Andy Bitter, actually.
That's right.
So, talking about this Virginia Tech staff that Justin Fuente has assembled for this year, but specifically speaking about Justin Hamilton, now that it's been about 2 or 3 months since he's been named the defensive coordinator, what were your initial thoughts on the hire, and what have you thought about the job that J. Ham has done since he's got the job?
Well, I don't really know about how he's done on the job because we haven't spoken to him.
That's a good point.
Or spoken to any of the new assistant coaches. So, I'm kind of flying in the dark with this stuff, too. I don't even know schematically how they plan to approach things. I would imagine it's not going to be too different from what it was previously, but there might be tweaks. You never know. But that'll certainly be something whenever we talk to him eventually that will be first and foremost on my questions to ask him. I think it could be a good hire. I mean, the Jim Leonard thing has worked out very well for Wisconsin. So it proves that, age is not a deterrent in some of these hires, that you can be a very capable coach even at that age, even with that level of experience. You couldn't ask for a better mentor if you're somebody of that age that you cut your teeth with as a player and then come back and work with as Bud Foster ahead of you. So, I mean, as somebody that knows the system, knows the players, knows the personnel, I think that should help him going forward. It'll be interesting to see how this defensive staff meshes. I think they made up for some deficiencies in certain categories. Tracy Claeys has some experience where Hamilton doesn't. Darryl Tapp and Ryan Smith have in-state ties where Bill Tierlink doesn't. Tierlink has that NFL experience where other guys don't necessarily have that. So I think it's interesting that they sort of cover their bases in a lot of ways with that. But I'm curious how that staff will mesh and how how much continuity there will be from the previous year to the next. Because I mean, that's a lot of the reason why people have high hopes for the Hokies next year, is that they have so much returning on the defensive side. Well, if they're returning and they're doing something completely different and aren't completely comfortable with it to start, you wonder how quickly they can sort of hit the ground running with that.
You guys want to add to that at all? Just, I mean, having time to process.
I'm blown away by the brilliance. So I'm speechless over here.
No, he's right. We don't know what the defense is going to look like. And I'm trying to write these scouting reports, and I need to get back and do one this week. For
scouting reports.
Right, for guys in the 2020 class. And I'm like, this guy's, if he's a defensive end or he plays this position or he's a safety, yeah, I think he's a rover, but are they even going to have a rover now? Or is it going to be like a strong safety, where the guy's always aligned to the run strength of the side of the formation as opposed to the short side of the formation all the time? So it's really hard to make these evaluations on players for Tech's system when you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. You know, I know the cornerbacks will be the same, I'm sure. I think we will see something little different up front with regards to how the defensive linemen are used to a certain extent, but I don't expect wholesale changes. Like he said, I expect tweaks, but you never really know till you get out there. I mean, Hamilton's coached or played in so many different styles of defense. The old style Virginia Tech scheme, then his first year in the NFL, he's with the Browns, and he's in the Saban-Belichick 3-4 scheme, and he was in a different scheme with the Redskins, I forget what. And then he kind of had his own scheme when he was defensive coordinator at UVA Wise, which I still call Clinch Valley. Did you even know it was?
I have no idea what that meant. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Clinch Valley College, right?
Yes,
I love how you know that. You know what I don't know. Like, you both will call me out on it.
Well, you don't know Office Space. From now on, I'm just going to assume you know nothing. So yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like, and that's why, like, spring games are generally speaking, you know, pretty boring. This one will be a little more informative than most, I think. You can look out there, and if there are any differences in how players align, maybe you'll be able to spot them, or maybe not. Maybe they just go completely vanilla when they know they've got eyes on them. I think they'll be very vanilla against Liberty in the first game. I don't know if we'll really get a real look at what the defense is going to look like until that second game of the season against Penn State.
Journalistically, that's refreshing to like have something new to write about. It's
absolutely.
Like, you know, Bud is I've been here since 2011, and you guys obviously have been here longer than that. It's like it's almost paint by numbers at a certain point when you're writing articles about stuff.
You've got like, a template, and you just change the year. Yeah.
So this is actually very interesting to have sort of a new perspective. It's not completely. It's not like they're running a 3-4 or something like that.
Right.
To have a new perspective on defense, it'll lead to some interesting stuff. At least writing about it, it'll be a different perspective.
So Clinch Valley College became UVA Wise in 1991.
Did it really?
According to Wikipedia.
I don't think we still called it Clinch Valley when I was in high school.
Yeah, that sounds awfully.
Like they would come to my high school and recruit and call themselves Clinch Valley. Still. So I don't even know if that's
in 1999, the Virginia General Assembly renamed the school University of Virginia's College.
Okay, that sounds about right.
Oh, following an unsuccessful effort to change the name in 1991.
There you go.
So I'm skimming. Yeah. So it was 1999.
Okay. Yeah. That makes
Which one of those is better, do you think?
Neither one of them is really satisfactory.
What is their team mascot?
That's a good question.
Oh, that's good. Let's go look at that.
The Wisers.
UVA was not related to UVA, right?
It's just like a guy with like a thinking.
I mean, I have no idea.
It's part of the University of Virginia.
Yeah,
it says
technically
here.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me see if they list mascot. Athletics. The Cavaliers. Should have guessed that.
Of course. We were the Cavaliers in high school.
You were what, Chatham?
Chatham. Yeah.
Okay. I remember covering Chatham.
Yeah.
My Danville days.
Well, I was going to talk to you about Danville also, and how we're two of the fortunate souls to actually escape at some point. I escaped after 18 years. You escaped after...
It was 20 months.
20 months.
Not that I was counting them.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah,
Danville was fine. It was the work environment that had some issues down there, to say the least.
For sure. And we had the Cross Sabers. We had the Cavalier as the mascot. We had someone on a horse dressed up as a Cavalier leading us out on the field before the game.
Yeah, you know, when UVA changed their logo, when they introduced that Cross Sabers logo, you saw it trickle down through some high school teams. Mm-hmm. You know, is Liberty the there's a Minutemen or something like that, and they
Bedford's the Minutemen.
and they suddenly had crossed like rifles or something like that. So you saw a lot of mimicking of the new
Dinwiddie
UVA.
High School in Richmond they've got the, what are you saying, the
Sabers, cross sabers.
I never heard that before. Okay, cross sabers.
Well, that's why it's called the Saber.com, the UVA site that's part of Sports War.
Mind is blown now. That's making a lot of sense.
You're learning so many things.
I'm learning so many things here on the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. We've got Andy Bitter here from The Athletic joining us. The last thing I want to do, talk about the offseason, because I do want to spend a little bit of time kind of recapping the season, looking ahead to 2020, is quickly just discuss this 2020 recruiting class and maybe throw in 2021 a little bit. Obviously, high hopes for 2021. That was said by many in the program as of late, and what that could turn out to be. But Andy, your thoughts on how the Hokies were able to finish the 2020 recruiting class, given the coaching changes? Any players you think that could have an impact here this year as a freshman, and then looking ahead to 2021?
I think they probably finished about as well as you could have hoped. They bring in the new coaches on the defensive line. You get Alec Bryant and Robert Wooten out of Texas. Those are the two highest ranked guys in the class, technically. It just kind of underscores how, lackluster the class was prior to that from a rankings perspective. But I think they like this Dalen Wright that signed, this receiver that had a big senior year. I think that's one thing that they're looking at, is that they want to be, scout these guys that sort of emerge as seniors and are pretty good guys like that. The class overall is pretty underwhelming, just in terms of star power. You don't have a headliner in it or a quarterback or anything like that. I think they like some of these guys further down, like Dorian Strong is one that I've heard that just jumped off the page at them at a camp before his senior season, and Virginia Tech's one of the first that gets in there and offers him, and he accepts on the spot. And I think that the staff is like, goes to the high school coach, like, now he's going to have a huge senior season. Like he is, and other schools are going to come in here and they're going to try to get him. But remember that we were the first that he committed here. And apparently, the coach up there, took that to heart. And other coaches came in, and he kind of didn't let them take too much of a look at him, and like, listen, he's committed to Virginia Tech. So I think he's one that they think they really got a steal on, and he's a player that rankings wise is nothing to write home about. I think his only other offer was Delaware State.
I think that's
something
right.
like that.
Which
the Christian Darrisaw path,
exactly.
Of,
the
Delaware State.
Path,
so,
yeah.
So that's just another example of these rankings aren't the end all thing. You can find these gems within that, but it'll be interesting. I think they went in a little bit different direction on the defensive line, especially at the end. You look at the two Texas guys, Justin Beatles, who's 6'5", 6'5.5", whatever they list him as. We'll see what his actual height is.
Right.
Prospects have a tendency to shrink once they get to campus, but I think that was my biggest takeaway, was just how they ended with maybe adding a little more length at that defensive end spot and trying to upgrade that position. And we'll see how 2021 goes. They're obviously off to a good start with Demetrius Davis. Pretty well-regarded quarterback prospect. Not the biggest guy, but just for what Tech does, I think he would seem to fit this offense quite well. I think they have high hopes within the state, which is something they probably should after last year getting one guy from Virginia. We'll see if that pays off, but I think 2021 things will kind of normalize with recruiting, where you don't have the uncertainty with Bud Foster's future. First there was whispers about, what's going to happen. Is he going to continue? And then it becomes, in the fall, who's his successor going to be? And that's tough. I mean, it's not quite like losing a head coach, but he was so, instrumental in this program that if you're a defensive recruit, you're probably not going to pick Virginia Tech, not knowing what the future is going to be at that position, or at least you're a little, iffy on that whole thing. They were also recruiting off of the worst season in the quarter century. They didn't turn things around until October this year. Right. So that's pretty late in the process to be, winning the hearts and minds of some of these recruits. So I think you'll probably see them get back to probably what they are ranking-wise normally. If they're top 30, that's probably a success in this class. But again, like I said before, it's finding those guys within that ranking that can maybe exceed the expectations, where they'll really find their success.
I'm going to be interested to follow the career of Dalen Wright. All right, he was a two-star guy from South Carolina whose other offer was Appalachian State. And compare his career to that of Jacoby Pinckney, who was one of the top players in South Carolina, who had this big offer list, 4-star guy, depending on which ranking service you use. I thought Pinckney was a really good prospect, but apparently he just...
And he may wind up working out somewhere else.
Maybe somewhere else. Who knows? I don't know where he'll from we heard from a work ethic standpoint, it was not the place for him. He wasn't a culture fit. Wouldn't it be crazy if the guy who helped Virginia Tech's recruiting ranking, he's done nothing in his career, but the 2-star guy who hurts the recruiting ranking goes on to have a good career, right? And that would be the perfect example of micro recruiting versus macro recruiting. On an individual level, recruiting rankings don't matter, but taken on the aggregate over the course of years, they do matter if you want to compete for a national championship.
Well, what's Wright's story? He's a 3-sport athlete. He's probably more of a basketball player than a football player.
Missed half his junior year.
Yeah, he got in a fight or something, got suspended for a couple games, and then he had his numbers his senior year were ridiculous. It was like 1,500 yards and 25 touchdowns.
Right.
And, Fuente said at the press
like
conference he put that team on his back and took him to a state title. He's from sort of a small town in South Carolina, so I don't think a lot of schools go through there. I mean, this is the kind of guy where people say, "Oh, there's no recruiting," under the radar type guys.
Yeah,
this feels like it is.
It is, and this one is.
So it proves that those guys you can still find them. Now, who knows how he does? I mean, we talk about all this stuff, and then he might get here. And do nothing,
what you hope is that 3 or 4 years down the road, Appalachian State is going, man, we almost
got a steal, man. Yeah, for sure. And they've had a good program, and that's how they've built their program, is obviously finding guys like that. But if you look at his Huddle profile, his picture on Huddle is of him playing basketball, which is telling right there.
There you go.
If you're a football and basketball player, all these AAU events from April on through the end of the summer, you have a choice. You can either go to football camps and try to get more scholarship offers, or you can go to AAU basketball events and try to get more scholarship offers. And it sounds like he went to AAU events and never went to any camps, and realized as a senior in high school that he was a better football prospect. And Virginia Tech had a spot, and it's always good to leave a couple of spots in your class open. One of the things Fuente hates about the recruiting process is it's gotten pushed so far up, because some guys don't develop physically until their senior years of high school. Stephen Curry's the perfect example. They're a different sport, but guy grows like 3 inches.
Chris loves a Molotov cocktail.
And then I'm going to change the subject right back to football. But a lot of guys don't develop physically till that senior year. But because the recruiting calendar's gotten pushed up, and you're taking commitments from guys a year in advance, guys are halfway through their senior seasons, and you're just now realizing they're a good player. Let's say it's a wide receiver. We've already taken 3 wide receivers in this class. We don't have room for this guy. So I think it's always good to leave a spot or two open to see if you can find a guy who gets a lot better as a senior. And I think Fuente is a guy who might really excel under the old recruiting system. When a lot of the recruiting was done between December and February, and that was it. You basically spent 2 of your 12 months recruiting.
Yeah, that changed in 1995 was when that changed, but that's a whole other topic.
And good discussion there about recruiting for sure. And what I want to do now is, we're about halfway through. I want to remind our viewers that if you're watching live on Facebook, drop your questions. Malcolm will take them. We'll get to them at the end of the show for Andy. We kind of want to start off the podcast talking about the current news, and then spend a little bit of time reflecting on the season that it was for Virginia Tech football. Sometimes, Andy, I'll ask these guys to describe things in 1 word or 3 words. So I'm gonna throw this at you. If you had to describe last season's Virginia Tech football season in 3 words, how would you summarize it?
3 words,
or less, or more.
Did that happen? I guess. I mean, it was just it was such a weird season. This time of year, or like in the summer, I think everybody goes through the games like, I'm going to predict which ones are going to win, which ones are going to lose. And I hit their record right at the end of the year. I said 8-4, but I got like every game wrong. The prediction, just like BC and Duke, I think they're going to win. Miami, I think they're going to lose. Like it was just wrong on all the games, but the end result was the correct prediction. But I thought they were going to be much better than they were at the start of the season. And then the way the first month went, I'm like, is this going to work out? To the point where like I hesitated writing like, oh my gosh, is Justin Fuente on the hot seat or is he in trouble? And I finally addressed it after the Duke game in a mailbag, just sort of not necessarily like what is he actually in trouble versus just like, you know, the buyout probably precludes any kind of talk of that. Because it was such a massive buyout, but that Duke result was just so bad that you're like, man, you wonder if things go south on this season, could that even creep into the conversation by the end of it? And then they put in Hendon Hooker, who had never really done much in any games, and I think there was justifiable skepticism about, oh, is this guy going to go in and just be the hero that saves the day? You know, I said it. I've said it many times. Like, you know, the backup quarterback is not the hero you think he is all the time. It's this. I think I called it backup pedestal syndrome, where you put the backup on this pedestal. It's like, oh, Mark Leal is going to be so much better than Logan Thomas if you put him in the game. That's rarely, if ever, the case, but that was the case this year, that Hendon Hooker was that good and that transformative for this offense. So to go from the way that first month went to the next 8 games, that was a pretty remarkable turnaround. I haven't seen anything in season like that since I've been covering Virginia Tech. I obviously didn't cover the 2010 season. That was before I got here when they went 0-2 to start that. But yeah, it felt like they turned that corner, and then at the same time, it almost felt like sort of a disappointment with how they finished. Where I think we were on the field. I think Aaron McFarland and I were down on the field at the end of the Notre Dame game, watching that, and Notre Dame's driving down the field to win it. But we're looking at each other, and we're like, this team's going to win the Coastal. Like right there, like we had seen like how they had sort of turned the corner and how, you know, they had no business even being in that Notre Dame game. If you look at the stats and everything that happened, I mean, I guess a 98-yard fumble return for a touchdown or whatever it was, we'll do that for you. But just the way that team was competing at that point, even when it was shorthanded, we're looking at it, we're going, I think this team is going to win the Coastal, and then they don't. And they, you know, sort of gave it away at the end of that UVA game. And then they gave away the Kentucky game in the bowl game. It was weird. The season started with high hopes, disappointing first month. Then they raised expectations that they turned out. And then it was almost sort of disappointing with how they finished. It's just an odd, you know, roller coaster of emotions there. That is, you look back and you're like, did that really happen like that? That was just a very strange season.
So let me ask you a question. What were you thinking after that Duke game? If somebody were to ask me that question, I would say, I don't think I was, you know, you got to remember I'm a Virginia Tech graduate. The reason I got into this is I was a fan and I wanted to write about Virginia Tech. I've tried to transition beyond that and be more analytical in nature and things like that. But there are times where just what I'm looking at overwhelms me. So if you were to ask me, what'd you think after that Duke game? And I would be like, I wasn't really thinking anything. It's what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was, what was that mess? What is going on here?
Yeah, I think that was the question that everybody, like, I'm, you know, pretty temperamental person. I don't go high and low with the program like a lot of the fans do. But even after that one, I was like, is this going to work out for Fuente? Like, I think Fuente is a good coach, but it's just like, is there a disconnect here with something that, yeah, the message is just not getting through to these guys? Because that game wasn't so much like, yeah, they got pushed around and
they started off really good. If you remember
that first quarter, yeah, they just couldn't do anything offensively. But Duke had like 0 yards in the first quarter. But it just seemed like it was a pattern with this team where one bad thing would happen. You know, you muffed a punt or threw an interception or something like that,
or gave up a big run.
Yeah, and I forget what was the Duke play that got things going. Was it an interception?
It was a fumble
on the end around Keshawn King.
Okay,
and Hendon Hooker,
and then Duke, like the next play,
scored.
And then it was just like the air went out of the balloon,
yes,
and
absolutely.
just like they just had no counterpunch, and you're like, that feels like it's a little reflective of coaching. Like if this team is that mentally weak that like one bad thing happens, then they just fold like a cheap suit.
Right.
And that's why the Miami result the next week took me by such surprise. I'm like, I didn't know they had it in them because they hadn't shown it, and it had been a year and a month of that team just one bad things happen and they didn't really respond to it. So. Yeah, I started questioning at that point. I'm like, is this really going to work out with this coaching staff and Fuente in charge? But obviously they flipped the switch and turned things around. I think it was was it Damon Hazelton that came in the next week and is like, it's not as bad as people think it is. And we all just kind of like, oh, right. Okay. You're saying it's like, no, he was right. I mean, it wasn't quite as bad as that. I think that was the famous Frank trait. When things were bad, he was like, it's not as bad. It's never as bad as you think it is. And he was sort of the
It's
guide.
never as good as you think.
He
it
was
is,
always
yeah.
sort of the guiding light through those tough times. I think when when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame, and I was talking to John Belan and Bud Foster and Shane, and that was sort of their message about him. Is he was always just sort of that steady guy, and he'd always liked that in his players. Those guys that were those steady guys in good times and bad. And I think Frank took a lot of criticism for that later in his career, being like, things are going to be all right. We're going to get through this, and everybody's freaking out. But I think sometimes you need that from your people in charge, and I think Fuente was like that. I mean, people are like, oh, you want him to go in the post game and just rip this team a new one and show emotion and all this stuff, or the players, you just want them to be inconsolable and stuff. It's like, is that going to make you better, or is it going to be you'll fix this, you'll come out and do it, and that's what they did? I think that's the better way to approach it.
Real quick, how do you think we'll look back on this 2019 home schedule? Because, going into the season, we've talked a little bit about it. Everyone was saying, oh, there's not a marquee game. How do you think 10 years from now Tech fans will look back on the 2019 home schedule and what transpired at Lane Stadium?
That North Carolina game's going to live forever. I mean, that was 6 overtimes. That one's going to be in the top 10 lists of home games all time at Virginia Tech. The other ones, I think it's less about the opponent than the circumstance. And, you're saying goodbye to Bud Foster, oddly in the Wake Forest game. That was such a weird.
It was.
It's like, don't want to overshadow senior day. It's like,
All four seniors.
All 3 seniors. Like, come on. But yeah, I mean, the fact that they go out and they, completely shut down a high-powered team like Wake Forest, that's pretty memorable. Pitt sending them off with a shutout like that's pretty memorable. So yeah, there were memorable outcomes in that, but I still don't think it changes the fact that it was a pretty just like boring home schedule. I mean, there's no getting around it.
It wound up being better than people thought it was going to be.
Right. Yeah.
Would you ever have thought before the season started that people would be that fired up about beating Wake Forest?
Have you ever been excited about playing Pitt in the rain?
Yeah.
Ever?
The win against Wake was the first win at home against a ranked opponent since Miami in 2009.
That's insane.
I know.
So, last thing on the season, we got to take a break here in just a minute. But Andy, I do want to get your quick thoughts on being a fan for the Rhode Island game and sitting in the stands and writing about that. What was that experience like for you?
It was fun. I hadn't gone to a college football game as a fan since I was a junior in college.
Wow.
And it was Wisconsin versus Iowa. And Ron Dane broke the career rushing record. It's like the second or third quarter, something like that. Everybody had these towels they held up. I still have the towel at home. So it had been a while, is the point I'm trying to make. And I think you kind of lose that perspective after a while. It's like, you guys have sat in the press box before. It's nice up there. It's cozy. There are drinks readily available. Yeah. The bathroom situation's not great. I cannot believe they built the press box and the luxury suites that share like a one stall bathroom with everybody.
It's a stall and a urinal to service, I don't know, a couple hundred people.
That is an amazing lack of foresight.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even for the media. It's like you're forcing like donors and luxury suite people
You're
to
paying
share a bathroom with us,
the media.
like unwashed masses over here. It's
You go in there and you see the luxury box people and you're like, hey, how you doing?
You go in there and you're like waiting in line for the bathroom with Frank. It's like, that probably shouldn't be happening. What was the question again?
Just being a fan of the Rhode Island game.
So, yeah, it's always fun.
Let me ask you something specific. When you talk about, so you're talking about 1999 when you were in the stands watching Ron Dane, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So 20 years later, you're sitting in a college football stadium, and there's all this noise coming from that video board at the end of, and just all this fan engagement stuff that's very different from 20 years ago. Did you notice that? What did you think of it?
Well, I'm trying to remember what it was back when I went to the game. I might have been slightly drunker.
Slightly. Andy and I had a beer before this game you're talking about.
Yeah. The bells and whistles on the video board, I mean, it's weird. You're like oddly drawn to it. Like, how people talk about in Jerry World, the big, huge thing. It's like, you just like, you look up at it all the time. I feel like I was just like oddly drawn to the Jumbotron. obviously because I'm a screen addict with my phone, and my phone was basically a paperweight when I was there because you can't get Wi-Fi or any kind of cell service. But it's fine. I mean, you got to do something. When the guy with the red hat and the red coat goes out there with the sign that's like 3 minutes 45 seconds, you're like, oh my God, this is going to take forever to do this thing. And actually the guy who does that messaged me after. He's like, I love the story. He's like, I don't make the decisions on this. Like, I know. You are like a proxy for my anger.
I think I remember the first time he went out there, he just kind of planted it in the field, and like the next game he learned to rotate it slowly so everybody could see it.
No, but it was fun. I mean, I got to go out there with my dad, do a game, so that was fun. But I mean, it's an interesting perspective because I'm used to something happens, I'll look at my computer and type some stuff in between the plays, and obviously during TV timeouts and stuff. And when you're in the crowd, you're just like there.
Yeah, when you're in the press box,
you're like, man, this is really dragging.
Well,
in the press box, the game goes a lot faster. When you're working.
When you're working, the thing about covering basketball games is, I'll find myself asking people on Twitter, I couldn't tell if that was goaltending or not. Those of you who were watching on TV, was that goaltending? You can see the game better on TV these days than you can if you're a fan.
Well, plus you're like, people rip on TV announcers all the time when they're covering stuff, but there's a lot of information you get from that you just don't have in the stadium.
Exactly.
You're like, what are they looking at?
I can't look at my phone. What are the refs reviewing there? I have no clue. Yeah.
And the refs don't really give you much of an explanation. They're
just
come out and they're like, still tech balls. And what was the explanation?
Even after football games, I'll go home and ask, so that incomplete pass they reviewed, they didn't show a replay on the Jumbotron. Yeah. Did he catch it?
I will say that's giving me a little perspective when we go in the post game and we asked Fuente it's like, on that third down play, did it look like he caught it? And he's like, I have no idea.
I don't have a television.
It's like now it's like I understand this. Like, you really don't know a lot of that stuff happening in the moment.
It's really hard. Your next game as a fan will be if Virginia Tech and Wisconsin ever actually play each other.
Like 2050?
Yeah, something like that. Wasn't that game announced when you were in college?
It was, I want to say 2002 or 2003, something like that.
So when I was in college.
By the way, the perfect solution to all this, college football just needs to adopt the XFL and the philosophy of everyone in the stadium can hear what the booth is saying to the officials and the TV.
I like the transparency.
When they go to review, they ought to play that over the video board.
That's what I think they do that in the stadium for the XFL, though. So everyone in the stands hear it and on TV hears it. They know exactly what they're looking at.
Well, people say that. I mean, the original XFL back in the day, the NFL stole a bunch of stuff that they did. The Sky Cam. I mean, that was the origin of that whole thing.
Really? That was XFL? Do you remember the World Football League years ago had the camera in the quarterback's helmet?
Yeah,
that was interesting.
There was I don't know if this was a Sega game or like a PS1 game back in the day when I was a kid, but there was a football game, and I think it only lasted 1 year. Like, obviously Madden crushed it, but you get a helmet cam, like you could play football. You were the quarterback.
Was that like Joe Montana football?
Maybe
or something like that.
It might have been something.
So he did have a video game. That's right.
For 1 year.
That might have been Joe Montana.
And now he advertises Skechers.
Yeah. You take the snap and you look at the field from a perspective of the quarterback, and
that's cool.
But you lose some of that when you're in the crowd, and you have no idea what's going on. But I noticed the downtime. That was one thing. It's weird, like fighting the masses to go down to get concessions and stuff like that. Like, it just kind of hammers home. And I would say like the pregame and the tailgate and the amount of time that people invest with this program, and obviously money to try to come down here. I think it kind of hit home with me. Like, this is why these people are so invested with this program, this team. It's like you think of what you do to drive down from DC and set up early and tailgate all day, and the money you spend on that, and then the team goes out and they stink. And I'm sitting up in the press box all the time. I'm like, you people should just be happy you have a team or something like that. And like, listen, we're kind of invested in this thing. It does drive the point home about why people get so worked up when things aren't going well. Mm-hmm. So, it was nice to get that perspective, because I think you lose that when you sit in the press box so much.
We've got a special edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast, episode 117. The Athletics' Andy Bitter's with us. We're going to take a quick time out here on the Tech Sideline Podcast, and when we come back, we're going to quickly talk about what to expect in spring ball, and then what are Andy Bitter's early expectations for the upcoming Virginia Tech football season. That's what's coming up on the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. Welcome back into the Tech Sideline Podcast, episode 117, a very special edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast as the Athletics' Andy Bitter joins us here on the podcast set. And now what I've really been looking forward to talking about this because it was the perfect Christmas gift this year for my dad. 100 Things Virginia Tech Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, written by Andy Bitter. Andy, tell us a little bit about the process of writing a book. What was it like for you?
So wait a minute, I got to give you a hard time. Why did they give that job to a guy who grew up in Minnesota and went to Wisconsin?
Who hadn't been to a game as a fan? Ironically, I remember when I was going to the game.
All kidding aside,
I'm like, anybody has any advice for the games? And people are like, this is pretty ironic that you're doing this. I'm like, I get it.
So all kidding aside, how does that affect your process? Because I know if I was covering Wisconsin and I had to write that book, I'd be pretty intimidated and would have to make sure I got it right. So,
well, part of it was I came over here and I asked you guys to look at my list of 100 things.
Right.
But you had a pretty darn good list by that time.
I mean, I had a good start. I mean, I've been covering the team for 8 years at the point when I got the assignment. So, and I had been in Virginia since 2002, with outside of a 3-year stint in Alabama covering Auburn. So, I had been around the program quite a bit. Had a little bit of knowledge about it, but coming in here, I'm like, anybody I miss? Or Chris Colston, emailed him. I'm like, let me know about some guys in the 70s and stuff.
Yeah, Colston goes way back.
Because his Go Tech Go thing, by the way, was incredibly informational and helpful in some of the stuff, just to make sure I didn't miss any of that. Sure. So,
did you hit up Doug Dowdy? And although Dowdy's book was about the Tech-UVA rivalry,
I did quote passages of that.
Yeah.
Him and Lazenby.
He needs to update that thing.
Yeah, I mean, it cuts off at like 1997 or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
But it had very good stuff about the origins of the UVA rivalry and the first player, the famous player,
Hunter Carpenter, who played like 8 years.
Make sure you show the book to the camera.
I had to look it up, but yeah, and they had great passages on him and like his obsession with beating UVA. And Chris is right; he was in college for like 8 years. It's like,
so
I guess the eligibility issues weren't as.
He was so obsessed that he transferred from Tech to UNC to beat UVA, and then he transferred from UNC back to Virginia Tech to play like another year or two.
And then before that game, when Virginia or VAMC back in the day beat UVA, there was like this big controversy because like the UVA student paper had said that they like wanted them to like sign affidavits to say that they weren't professional players or something like that, and like he ended up like saying they slandered him in the newspaper. There's like a whole big controversy, and like almost the game was almost not played. And eventually they did play it, and Carpenter won it and got ejected from the game.
Punched somebody in the face. Yeah.
If I had a time
what year
machine.
would this be like?
This is like 1895 or something like that.
Yeah.
It was way back then.
It was back at the beginning.
So yeah, I mean, it was stuff like that was fun to research because like who's gonna know about that otherwise? Yeah. I mean, you have to be like a true diehard.
If some of the stuff that happened in the early days of college football before there was TV and social media and anything basically, if some of those things happen today, people would have a lot of things to say about them. Like if one of Tech's players right now went out and punched somebody in the face during a game and got ejected, you'd be like, what's wrong with that guy? Well, but Hunter Carpenter did it in 1905, so it's okay.
Hunter Carpenter was essentially like a professional player.
Right.
Who entered the transfer portal and came back after entering the transfer portal, was like an 8th-year senior, and he was a thug who got ejected from games. And fought. Like, I mean, like if people say like, "Oh my gosh, these guys these days are so," it's like this guy was like that.
Pretty much Hunter Carpenter.
So 100 years from now, we'll look back on LeGarrette Blount and the punch he threw for Oregon as like how we look back at Hunter Carpenter.
And we love Hunter Carpenter for all those reasons. Actually,
that's amazing. Yeah. Think about that too, UVA and Tech just 100 years ago, and how it's still kind of a thing today. Of course. So.
All that investigative reporting by the UVA newspaper.
Yeah, but it was stuff like that that was fun about writing the book and like going back and looking this stuff up. And I'll be honest, last year when I got the assignment like August, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to do this book?" I'm like, "Yes, that would be a great thing."
August
to do.
of 2018.
August of 2018.
Right.
And they're like, you want to do this? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a great project in the off season.
Not now.
And this is right after I had started working for The Athletic.
Yeah.
And, I got all my product placement today. Will's got the...
And I'm wearing an old school
the All-American.
Athletic
That's like vintage
t-shirt.
right there. That's no longer
I
branded.
I was one of the early subscribers, and I think they paid me to subscribe. Actually, I subscribed
for a year before I actually worked there. So I think it was more out of hope for like the industry, like hopefully this will work. But I just started at The Athletic, so like obviously want to do a good job with the job I just got for the company that was supporting me with all the resources in my Twitter lawsuit. You want to do good work for that.
Well, we're going to talk about that.
So, during the season, like I kind of put it off. I had like 2 chapters I had to file in like October, just as like benchmarks. Like, here's what I'm doing. Just make sure you're doing everything right. So it gets around the bowl game, and that's the military bowl year. So I'm up in D.C. like 2 months before this thing is due, and I've got like 5 chapters done out of 100. So I just went into like assembly line mode, where it was like every night. I put my daughter to sleep at 8 o'clock, and then I would just churn out chapters at night. Do my regular job during the day, put her to sleep, and then just like write till midnight every single night. So I'm churning out like 3 chapters on some of the weekends. I'd get a really good day. I think I would get like 7 chapters done, and I did it. So I got them done by like February 1st. So I had 2 weeks to like go back and edit and go through stuff. But it was an intensive couple of months, like a month and a half doing that stuff. And the final product I think turned out great. Is really rewarding to like see your name on a book and like this go to Barnes and Noble. And
so is that your first book?
Yeah, first book.
Cool.
And people are like, oh, so what are you gonna write for your next book? I'm like, I don't know if I want to do another book. Like that was a lot of work doing that. I think I'll just enjoy this the product as it is right now.
So you can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There's a website, I can't remember what it's called, where you can like find a local bookseller if that's your thing.
100 Things to Do. What's the exact title? Virginia Tech fans.
100 Things Virginia Tech fans should know and do before they die.
We need to, for next week's show, we need to print off that list of things and check off every single one that we've done.
We do.
Oh, I'm sure you guys have done or known everything in here. The thing is like this thing goes, I filed it almost a year ago to the day. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you have to do some editing and some rewrites. Buzz Williams leaves. That changes the Buzz Williams chapter a little bit. Yeah. So the book is about to come out. I think it came out September 3rd last year. And obviously start of spring or August practice, Bud Foster announces his retirement. That happened. I'm like, oh man, what did I put in the Bud Foster chat? Like, I hope I didn't end the chapter like, and Bud Foster will continue for years and years to come or something like that. Like, I went back and looked down. I'm like, thankfully, I did not leave it open ended like that. I ended it. I think I ended with like he said, "This is home" or something like that's not dependent on time or how long he's going to be the coach.
So question for you: is one of the 100 things tailgate on Center Street?
It was not.
Oh,
I kind of folded that into the attend a game at Lane Stadium. I mentioned Center Street on that. I didn't feel like I had the in-depth knowledge about the Center Street tailgate or the first-hand knowledge.
You could just Google it.
I could, but I don't feel like that's the same experience. I feel like it would have been disingenuous to be like, you got to do this.
True.
Having never gone there and not being of that age that would go in there to do that.
It's a spectacle.
Well, on the game I attended, we walked by that, and I'm with my dad. He's 75. Walked by that, and we're like, yeah, that's a little bit of a young crowd for us. I think we're going to just keep on walking by that.
I can see myself being 75 and still being drawn to
there's a story to be written there, but it is a story to be written by a college stage student experiencing that, and not a 40-year-old like myself.
All right.
One thing I do want to ask you about, and I don't know if this correlated to the book, but I remember at one point you tweeted that you were at Tots.
That was research for the book.
And you had a rail in the middle of the day, right?
Yeah, I did.
You just tell us about that experience.
Well, that was one of the chapters, was have a rail at Tots, and you kind of tie that into other downtown stuff that you do on a game day. And I'm like, I haven't had a rail at Tots since I think the 2006 or 2006 or 7, which one of those games was in Blacksburg.
Which one of what games?
UVA games. I'm sorry.
Okay.
2006 was in Blacksburg.
Okay, because I was covering UVA back then, so I was here. And
okay.
I think afterwards, this is when Nathan Waters was covering Virginia Tech for the Lynchburg paper. I was covering UVA. Norm was still on the beat, obviously. Daryl Slater, Kyle Tucker, Adam Kilgore. We were all on the
So
beat
the lesson here is
so,
that covering UVA drove you to drink.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, after that game, we all went out. We ended up at Tots. That was the first rail I had.
Wow.
So that was my first experience with it, but you don't really remember that. I don't know if that was because of the rail itself or because it was so long ago. So I'm like, I'll go out lunchtime and have one, and I'll tell you, it did the trick. It was, you have one of those, and man, you're like, you feel it after one of those. And I was a little sick at the time too, so not like sick from the alcohol, like sick. I had a cold.
Clears out the sinuses.
Yeah, it does. It does do that. So it was pretty good. It wasn't like the full.
I always drink more when I get a cold. You just have to. It makes you feel better.
Yeah, it wasn't like the full Tots experience. I wasn't there on like a bar night or something like that. Yeah, eating a sandwich at lunch and having a rail is probably not the same thing as going out there on a Friday night. But, it gave me some perspective for that chapter. But, yeah, it was the one time I can legitimately say I'm out here for official work business having a rail for lunch.
100 Things Virginia Tech fans should know and do before they die. Show that up to the camera one more time. You can get that again on Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Anywhere you can buy books. I know they have a couple of copies on the shelf.
If you have Google, you'll be able to find it.
Yeah. Well, I ordered it off Amazon from again a Christmas gift from my dad. He loved it, so really highly encourage.
If you go into Barnes and Noble, it's like because they put the authors' names alphabetically. So you have Frank Beamer. Let Me Be Frank. That book is up there. I know he didn't write it. Jeff Snook wrote the book, but it was Frank's words that he put into the book. Buzz Bissinger, Friday Night Lights, like the best sports book ever written. And then my book after that. So I'm like, hey, you got all your sports needs are taken care of in one little 3-author stretch there.
There you go. All right, we're going to be rapid fire here. We're over an hour on the podcast, and we still quickly want to just briefly touch on spring practice and floor and ceiling of the 2020 Virginia Tech football team here in February as we talk about it. What stands out to you about spring practice, though, right now, Andy?
I think it's just the unknowns on defense. And, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, just what the scheme is going to look like. A lot of these guys, I know they know them, but they're sort of re-auditioning for new coaches. And when that happens, you never know exactly how things are going to play out. Is Tracy Claeys going to look at the linebacker situation the same with Dax at backer? Or is they going to tweak something there and Tisdale gets more time? I think it's just sort of the unknown right now that is the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So rather than repeating what he just said, I'll look at the offensive side of the ball and say wide receiver depth. Obviously, with Damon Hazelton gone, you got one proven player there as an outside receiver, and that's Trey Turner. So who steps up there? Does James Mitchell take on more of that role? And obviously, who replaces Dalton Keene at H-back? Such an important position in Justin Fuente's offense.
I didn't even hear the question because I was busy
looking at his phone.
I'm looking up the 2020 schedule.
That'll transition well.
How about this? The offensive line, too. I mean, there's so many. You have Brock Hoffman back in the mix, and you have so many guys competing for 5 spots that there's going to be legitimate battles at every position.
There were years.
I have no idea how it's going to play out.
There were years in the past where Virginia Tech starting offensive linemen. I remember one year in specifically where I only thought 3 of their starting 5 offensive linemen were FBS players.
Yeah. And they don't have that problem anymore.
They don't have that problem anymore. This is much better.
Yeah. Let's transition. Go ahead and talk about the 2020 season. Will, you've got the schedule up. Andy, I'll let you get the first crack at it. I know it's February. It's early, but it's always fun for us to kind of just look at it and speculate a little bit. Let me ask you this. Floor and the ceiling of this 2020 team. What do you think record-wise?
Ceiling, I think 10-2 is probably there. I mean, I guess if you want to stretch the imagination, there's a world where you could conceive 11-1 if people want to really let things kind of go. I think a 10-win season within reach. I think that'd be a 2-game improvement on last year, which is reasonable.
They were a couple of 4th down stops away from winning.
Yeah, I mean they were close to it this year. I think that's certainly possible, especially with what they have coming back. Floor, I'd probably put it in the 7-5 range, just because I think a bowl game is probably a given. just with the non-conference schedule they have. If they take a step back from last year, I don't think it'd be a huge one. I suppose I could see a situation where, a receiver gets hurt, like an important receiver like Trey gets hurt, and then like who are you going to throw the ball to, or a quarterback gets hurt, and how are the backups going to do? I mean that's sort of those situations where a team would underperform. But I'd probably say 7-5 at the worst, and best of the best, maybe 11-1. But 9-3 is my prediction. So
there you go, right in the middle. All right, we'll take questions here.
Well, my floor would be 8-4, and ceiling would be 11-1. So take what he said and just add a win.
Yeah, I think the absolute ceiling would be 11-1, and that's if everybody stays healthy, and you get more bounces than goes against you, right?
Yeah.
And 7-5 range would be the other way around, where you have a bunch of injuries and you don't necessarily get those bounces. But in general, I think probably if I was Vegas, I'd set the over/under at 9.5.
I'd go lower than that with an over. I'd say like 8.5.
I always put a half in there.
I'd say 8.5 because I'd be like 8 and 9. I could see both those happening. Like 9, if you said at 9.5, you're like saying they have to win 10 regular season games. Like that's
to go over.
Not easy.
Yeah,
that's tough to do.
It is.
So Andy's at 9-3 right now. February, where does Chris Coleman and Will Stewart sit? If they
I'm on the 9-3, 10-2 fence.
I'll get on the 9-3 train. The games that are going to be tough are Penn State, UNC, and who am I leaving out?
Miami.
Miami. Yeah.
DR King.
I don't know, man. You'd have to lose all three of those to go. But
and Louisville. I think Louisville was sneaky.
Louisville's very well coached, so you're right. I think they're well coached.
This is what we do every year: is you go ahead and you try to pick the games that they're going to win, and then
right.
2016, did you think Tech was going to lose to Syracuse?
So
last year, did you think they'd lose to BC and Duke? I mean, just these games,
right? And then beat Miami, and
I try to do this based on not like going by game. I'm like, is the team better than they were last year?
Right?
Are they? And I think they are, and so that's why I'm picking a 1-game improvement. I think it was Reese Davis that I was listening to when he was talking about like trying to do predictions, and he's like, if you have deficiencies, a loss will find you.
Right.
You don't go through the schedule and say, "Oh, you should be better than Georgia Tech, or you should be better than this team," because on a given day something might show up, and then you end up losing that game.
And you have to admit that the schedule is more difficult this year simply because you don't play 2 FCS opponents, right? And you add Penn State.
Yep. So Penn State in place of Notre Dame.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
UNC is going to be better.
Sam Howell's going to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so anyway. But at the same time, you think UVA takes a little bit of a step back.
Right.
Who knows with Pitt?
Yeah, I don't know anything about them.
There's a lot of teams in the ACC that are like, you're not head and shoulders better than, but the matchup's close enough that it could go either way.
Thin margin either way, yeah, absolutely.
I think there's probably fewer games where I look at it ahead of time this year and I go, that's 50-50. Whereas last year I thought that was the entire schedule. And that's part of the reason why I said 8-4, and I thought I was on the low end of what a lot of people were predicting. I think a lot of people were like, 10-2 or he's fired. It's like, well, first of all, if 10-2 or he's fired is your default, you need to recalibrate those expectations, because 10 wins is quite an accomplishment. I know Frank Beamer made it look easy, but to win 10 games is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
But Duke picked up Chase Bryce. Do you guys see that transfer from Clemson? Yeah. So there's going to be a couple new quarterback faces in the ACC Coastal next year. All right, without further ado, he has sat there and waited so patiently. He is the best producer in the land. He is Malcolm Stewart. He's got our Facebook Live questions. Malcolm, how's it going over there, my friend?
I'm doing all right. We will start with Chris Grella. How big of an impact is a head coach's personality on overall recruiting? Example, Franklin versus Fuente.
We are being baited here.
Listen, guys recruit in all sorts of different ways. I think the key to recruiting is to be yourself with it, because I think these recruits can sniff out an imposter. And, Franklin, I feel like part of Franklin's is an act, but it is still kind of how he is all the time. He's like PJ Fleck, where I don't know if you can be that over caffeinated all the time. So I think it's a little bit of a put on, but I think it generally is in line with what their personality is like. If Fuente tried to go out there and be like James Franklin do all this stuff, and he's running around, and like Fleck does, where he's running up and down the sideline like that. It would just feel not genuine. And I feel like recruits and young people can see that. They can tell when you're forcing something like that, because they don't just see the press conferences. Like they come to your home and they sit there with you. They're going to get a good sense of what you are. So, is it better to be a big personality like that in recruiting? It probably helps a little bit, but I don't think it's something you can fake necessarily. So
yeah. I don't want a fake football coach. I mean, I think that's terrible. Now you also have to understand. All right, I've sat in plenty of Justin Fuente press conferences. I've also sat in Justin Fuente's office with him and one other person, and the atmosphere is completely different. He is a totally normal guy when you sit in his office.
Yeah.
And that's the atmosphere in which recruits see him. So this stuff you see on television at press conferences.
This water bottle right here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've been trying not to do too much of the water
That's
bottle.
not the Justin Fuente that recruits see. So that's completely overblown. That's just something that the people are nitpicking right now. But that's not the Justin Fuente that recruits see.
Some guys just have I don't know. And it's not just the personality. Like, you look at what Mac Brown's doing down at North Carolina. He had a good recruiting class last year. He's off to a really good start this year. That's not just Mac's come on in, gosh golly personality, his genuine personality. It's the brand. It's the assistant coaches he's hired. It's the whole operation.
How big his staff is.
Yeah. So it's
we sat here. We started this show talking about Virginia Tech's lack of resources relative to other schools. So don't expect Fuente to win a gunfight with a knife, right?
And you look at a guy like Ed Orgeron, and we've talked about this. Orgeron is so well staffed and funded that all he's got to do is go around and be Ed Orgeron.
He went 10-25 at Ole Miss. His last year there was 0-8 in the SEC, and now all of a sudden he's coach of the year.
And he's killing it because he's got tremendous support at LSU,
right.
And his personality.
His personality didn't help him any at Ole Miss, did it?
Go Tigers!
Well, I think there's room for growth as a coach.
Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, he had a pretty public failure like that. Mm-hmm. He bounced back. He did pretty well as an interim coach at USC, which USC in hindsight, man. We should just get Orgeron here.
I'm trying to picture Orgeron at USC.
In LA, that's just an odd.
He had a couple of coaching stints there, so it's not like it was a one-time thing. Yeah. So
he was in Miami too at one point.
But I mean, talk about the perfect marriage of coach and culture and city and school. I mean, that's LSU.
So from that standpoint, the personality does matter. And I think I didn't phrase it that way in talking about Mac Brown. Mac Brown's a really good fit at UNC. Yeah. So
I talked to somebody who has been at one of LSU's coaches shows in Baton Rouge, like their version of Tech Talk Live, and he said it was just another world. All those Bayou people show up in this restaurant, and Orgeron comes in and just says "Go Tigers" for like an hour, and everybody just eats it up.
Well, I'll say this: we talk about personality. Gus Malzahn at Auburn is the most bland person on the planet. And he's a pretty good recruiter. And now that's a school that has the resources, and they have a bunch of other people out there that do that stuff. So personality is not everything. You have to look at the big picture with some of this stuff. Could it help a little bit? Yeah, I'd say so. But I don't think it's put James Franklin at Bowling Green. I don't think he's recruiting like he is at Penn State right now. There are more factors to it.
Yeah, good question.
All right, Ronnie Adams has a question specifically for Andy. Is Teal headed to the Athletic? I hate to waste him on those silly who's.
I don't know. I really wish that we would hire him. I don't know if that's in our plans or anything like that. It's like, but man, that's like quite a free agent.
I was going to say he's the top of the market free agent right now. He's setting the bar.
It just tells you how rough this business is, just in general. If a guy like Teal. Some newspaper company could come in and buy up a paper and be like, this guy, like, they obviously know that he would make their product better, but for some reasons, the like financial and everything involved with it, they're like, no, we're better off if we get rid of guys like this. And it's like, man, what are you doing? Like,
now, to be clear, they didn't get rid of
it.
They
didn't. I mean,
they offered buyouts.
They offered the buyouts, but behind that reasoning is if you're offering this out and all these experienced people take it, your product is going to be worse. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just a straight up fact. And so they're making decisions now with the product in mind. I realize the challenges with newspapers and how tough it is financially to make that thing work. But I don't feel like this is the answer.
If I had $100 to spend tomorrow and I had a choice between a whole newspaper or stuff David Teal wrote, I would pick David Teal.
Right. Because
No
that's where
question.
you're interested.
Yeah.
I'd say that if Teal came to the Athletic, we'd crush some subscriptions.
Sure.
I'll say that much. Like, man, it'd be like over in the state of Virginia. Like it would be a very good scene. So fingers crossed. Hopefully.
I'm sure he's very busy listening to offers right now.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the other thing is Hall of Fame sports writer like that.
That helps.
He'll probably have some options.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked him. I DM'd him and I said, "Listen, I know you got a lot coming at you, but we'd love to have you on the podcast. When are you going to be in Blacksburg again?" And he's going to be in town for the Tech UVA basketball game, which I think is Wednesday the 26th. And I told him that would fit really well in the schedule. Games at 7 o'clock at night. You can come do the podcast in the morning, And he said, "I'll think about it." And I think what "I'll think about it" means is I don't know who I'm going to be working for at that point in time.
Yeah. That is a good point. Plus, sometimes after the games, they'll just drive back to Newport News.
Yeah.
And they make that full round trip on a single day. Oh yeah, that's long.
Yeah. All right, Malcolm. What else we have?
Tim Wisman, thoughts on Tavion Robinson? Will he have a stronger second year?
I think so. He didn't really. I mean, I know he had some big receiving games, but he didn't really step into that punt returning role until the second half of the season, which I thought he was fantastic. I mean, you look at his average; it's up there among the nation's best. I think he had 14 returns on the season. I think better things are ahead for that guy just because, he'll finally be in a college weight room for the first time this offseason. I mean, to show up on campus and then play immediately like that is a very tough thing to do. So the longer he's in practice, learning plays and the playbook and has everything down, and the more he's in a weight room, getting better that way, I would think better things are ahead for him. I don't know if that's going to translate to, he's going to have a 1,000-yard season or something like that, or some huge increase in his stats, but I think he'll be a better player for sure.
Well, you consider the fact that he didn't even play wide receiver in high school. He was a quarterback. What he did this past season, learning a completely different position and a college playbook in 1 month, was extremely difficult, and he was able to do it. So from that standpoint, he's going to get better because he's gaining more and more experience at a position that is still relatively new to him.
I was trying to look up his stats.
You're shaking your head over there.
I was trying to look up his stats for the season on Hokie Sports, and it wasn't cooperating. Not on the phone anyway.
And just go to Sports Reference. Sorry, Hokie Sports.
It's that. What is the server that every site uses now?
Sidearm.
It's just so unusable.
Virginia
Tech site used to be great, and they used to do it in-house with all the stats, and now they have to wedge it into this other system, and it's almost unusable.
Stats for a player these days, I just type in the player name and then College Sports Reference and go to their College Sports Reference page.
So the question is, if you think how good do you think he's going to be? Is what were his weaknesses last year? And Andy brought up that he didn't start returning punts till late in the season, so he has potential to get better at that. And honestly, I don't really know what his weaknesses were.
He had some
drops. Yeah. He's just not used to catching the ball.
Yeah.
I think some of that is like he was looking ahead to what he was doing next before.
You remember the big one again in the ODU game. It was like 3rd and 10, and he was coming across the middle on a slant. And there was no ODU guy within 25 yards of him. Yeah. And he just dropped it. And it killed a drive. Probably cost Tech 7 points. I think he had a drop against Notre Dame, maybe. So some hands. He's got to continue to work on hands.
Also, his throwing on reverses
could use some work. Also,
his decision making.
The Georgia Tech game, was that him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. Because I remember at the time, I'm like, why would you waste that at the Georgia Tech game? And I guess maybe seeing the end result of it is why they wasted it at the Georgia Tech game, as it wasn't a fully formed play. But maybe a little bit with the passing as well.
All right, what's next, Malcolm?
Kevin Whitley. Assuming Hendon Hooker is the starter, do you see Quincy getting on the field in situations other than the backup quarterback?
Yeah, I do. I think that's something they'd like to do with him is do it more than just even like a wildcat quarterback situation, which is really all he did other than the games where he had to come in as an injury replacement. I think they'd like to give him a bigger complement of the offense and kind of develop him in that way. Because you don't want to just keep giving them little bits and pieces or like a niche part of the offense, because then, if push comes to shove and you have to start the game, you're not really prepared for that. So I would imagine that they would try to get him more than just little bits and pieces here in this next season. Maybe a fully formed drives and more than just ramming him into the line like a battering ram.
Well, the first thing it's going to depend on is whether he's second string or third string. Because once the season starts and you're preparing for different opponents, you don't get your third string quarterback very many reps at all, because the likelihood that you're actually going to have to use your third string quarterback is very unlikely. It happened once this past year. It happened once back in 2008 at Florida State. Those are the only times I can ever remember Virginia Tech ever needing a third string quarterback. So once a decade, basically. Or once every decade and a half.
It is a new decade.
Exactly. You're right. Yes, that's true. So I think the chances increase if he becomes Virginia Tech's second string quarterback. But if he's third string, I don't know if there's enough reps to go around that you're able to do that. So he's got to beat out. If he beats out Burmeister, he puts himself in a better position for something like that to happen.
Well, I will say with Hooker as the presumed starter, not the most durable guy.
Correct.
He takes a beating out there.
Yeah, he does.
Running the ball a lot. He's not Gerard Evans' size. He's not Logan Thomas' size. So, he had the knee last year. I mean, his left shoulder popped out of place early in the season. They popped it back in. There's just a lot of things where I think that was actually part of the initial reason why they were maybe hesitant to go to head.
That's right.
They didn't know how long he could play in a game, or if he would hold up under that kind of punishment. So I think that concern will still be there next year, and that's part of the reason why they would like to get these backups, up and ready to go in case they need to go that direction.
Right, and I'll say Tech's got to be the only school in the country that currently has 3 quarterbacks on the roster who have won a Power 5 football game. Right, as Fuente brought that up. Quincy didn't start against UNC, but he played the second half.
He got the win in relief.
He got the win.
It's like a pitcher in baseball. He ends up getting credited with the win.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
he pitched 3 solid innings.
Right,
but at
the same time, in the modern era of college athletics, that's not a situation that is probably going to last. You expect to keep 3 guys like that on the same roster for more than a year.
The portal beckons.
Somebody's got to be third string.
Yeah.
No, but nobody wants to be, right? Yeah.
How about one more, Malcolm?
All right, last one from Patrick McHale. How good can the 2021 recruiting class be? Top 25? Top 10?
Not top 10.
If they go top 25, I think that's a success.
Yeah.
If they're around 20, I think that's, and maybe even the high teens, that's probably best case scenario, just because historically that's the ceiling for Virginia Tech. And like I said, I don't think it really changes too much over time from coach to coach. I mean, it's sort of the program's capabilities as recruiters. Would they get to like 17th this year after being 71st last year? That seems like a stretch. But I think if they go top 30, that's pretty good. If they're low 20s, that's probably something to celebrate for Hokies fans.
I've gone through this exercise before. People who want Tech to sign top 10 or top 15 classes, and let's say you take a year where Virginia Tech ranks 25th. You look at the 24 teams ahead of them, and then you say, okay, that means Virginia Tech is going to have to beat out these 24 schools for recruits. So you throw out the West Coast teams because Tech doesn't even recruit against them head-to-head. So basically any team west of the Mississippi ahead of Tech in the rankings you throw out because Tech is not recruiting head-to-head against them. And then you consider the East Coast teams, Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, Penn State. Is it realistic for Virginia Tech to win enough of those battles against those programs with as much money as they have and as much fan support and as big as their staffs are? Is it realistic enough for Virginia Tech to win enough of those battles to jump into the top 15 or 10?
So that's
or even
really
20.
That's the question that's being asked. It's not how highly ranked do you think their class can be. How many of these recruiting battles against the Blue Bloods can you win?
Is that conceivable?
Well, it's like Tony Grimes. And what's he, number 10 nationally? Mm-hmm. It was like, oh, what are their chances with him? And I'm just straight up honest with him. I'm like, next to nothing.
Right.
Like, other than Kevin Jones, has Tech won any of those battles in its history? Recruiting-wise? I mean, Marcus Vick was pretty high up there.
Yeah, but
overall.
and
obviously there was a reason why.
And they had the inside track on Tyrod the whole time, basically.
Right. But even he wasn't like a top 50 guy, was he?
No, he was.
Yeah,
he was 5-star.
Where was Macho Harris? Do you remember, Chris?
He was started off as a 5-star and ended as a very upper 4-star.
Yeah, so that's pushing top 50.
Kendall Fuller was the last 5-star of this program,
Yeah,
landed,
yeah.
correct, in 2013?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of what you're up against,
Yeah.
especially with, when Clemson and Alabama and Ohio State and all these schools that play in the playoff every year come in and can, like, show that to a guy. You going to want to do that, or you play on the biggest stage in college, or you want to go to the Belk Bowl? Like, that sort of tells you kind of the it lays out the competition there and what might be at play.
Yeah, you can't sit here and talk about how behind Virginia Tech is from a resources standpoint and a staff standpoint. You can't admit that, yet also expect this staff to improve recruiting with those resources that are lower than everybody else's, right? Yeah. How could you possibly expect that?
But then again, when you talk about recruiting support staff and all that stuff, that's not really a factor in the Grimes recruitment.
Correct.
They know about him, and they're going to recruit him.
Yeah.
You don't need Huddle to find out that Tony Grimes
Yeah.
is a good player.
But there are other resources we talk about that are factors.
Yes.
All right. Thanks to everybody for the great Facebook Live questions. We appreciate that. Thank you, Malcolm. And all of a sudden, it has turned into the longest podcast we've ever done here at Tech Sideline. So, Andy, thank you for sticking around a little bit extra longer. But this has been fantastic.
What time is your dentist appointment?
It's at noon.
Okay.
What time we got?
11:15.
Okay.
But
that'll be less pleasant than this was.
I saw a tweet. I'll shout out my buddy Bailey Angle to close. He tweeted something the other day and said, like, basically along the lines, Tech fans, would you take a national championship in football if it meant you had to go to the dentist every 3 months for an intensive cleaning? And like 90% of people said yes. And he was like, come on now. I mean, dentist every 3 months is a tough
cleaning's
sell.
not that bad.
You know who hates going to the dentist? Cam Chancellor. I found that out years ago.
Really? Also, my daughter, last time we went there, and they got like the bottom teeth clean. And then the top, and then she was not let him do the bottom. She sat there.
Wow.
So she was pretty good the previous time before that.
It's
but
awful.
They're like, we don't want to traumatize her, so we'll leave it with this. But
Andy, how can everybody, if they're not already, follow along with what you're doing? Your great work at The Athletic and on social media. How can everyone follow along with you?
theathletic.com. All my stuff's up there. There's a Virginia Tech tab, so it's real easy. You just go there and bookmark that, or on your app. If you follow Virginia Tech on that, everything will just pop up into your feed. Very easy. Andy Bitter VT remains my Twitter account after much wrangling there. So yeah, I'm on Twitter, Andy Bitter VT. I got a Facebook page that is less popular now than it was when I was writing for Roanoke and everything was free. So yeah, look at the Twitter account. That's probably the best way to find all my stuff, because I'll tweet it out throughout the day.
Fantastic. Will, Chris, any final thoughts here before we sign off?
Nope, just appreciate you being on.
Yeah, no,
thanks for having me.
Thank you again, Andy. A lot of fun. Appreciate it. Again, this has been a terrific episode of the Tech Sideline.
We will do it
podcast.
again someday, and we will talk about the Twitter battle.
Yes.
We
I was trying to work that in. I was just
There's
like,
only so much I can say about it with
Yeah.
the settlement and the non-disclosure agreements and non-disparagement agreements and everything involved with that. So
Right.
I'd have to walk a delicate tightrope.
He'd have
talk
to
too
come in
much
here
about
and
it.
have a lot of documents right here saying,
I'll have my
"This is
lawyer,
bad."
Ben Rottenborn, and that is his name, the team of Rottenborn and Bitter. I could have him on the set with me, and anytime I started to stray a little bit too far, I'd be like, no, I won't go with that. So.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's Andy Bitter. This has been episode 117 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. We will be back on Monday morning. I will have viewed Office Space, and we will lead off the podcast with that. A reminder to follow us here at Tech Sideline on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Tech Sideline. If you're watching this video on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. That'll do it for the best producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart, on the podcast set. Andy Bitter, Chris Coleman, Will Stewart. I'm Evan Hughes saying so long. Thanks so much for watching. This has been episode 117 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, brought to you by the Fisher Law Firm. Have a great week, everybody.